Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us probably our favorite guest, Tom Woods, host of Tom Woods Show. Just a very good friend of mine, someone I look up to. We are not lovers. I just really want to clarify that. And our cartoon is coming out at some point, but it's done. We're done recording it, the Politically Correct Guide. What I want to talk to you about, and which I'm a little bit nervous to talk to you about, is the videos you made about COVID, because these videos were very successful for you. They're a little bit outside your purview because you stick to mostly political economics and things like that. And you tend to shy away from current events. And I'm glad you sat down and you were like, a lot of what we're being told just doesn't add up in its own terms. And one of your videos even got pulled, and I want you to talk me through what these videos were, how they got pulled, and just give me a little bit overview, because I'm going to have a lot of questions, because it seems to me, it seems to everybody, that there's a lot of contradictory information at best about the whole lockdown stuff and the masks and things like this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, first I'll just give you the rundown of the videos. There are actually 4 videos that I've made. One of them just came out. So the first one was...
And we're going to link to those in the show notes so people can...
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so the first one was called The Fact-Free Lockdown Hysteria. That was from the Mises University program this summer. And that did really well. That's still around, and that had a gazillion views. Then I did one with a similar title, so I think some people didn't watch it because they thought they'd already watched it, but the best one was the second one, called The Fact-Free COVID Dystopia. Then the third one people liked because it was really short. It was barely 20 minutes because that's all they gave me. And that was the one that got pulled. It was called The COVID Cult. And then finally, the one I just released has a certain significance because of the audience. I was speaking to 100 state legislators from around the country, and I was trying to urge them, even if there's only one of you in your legislature, if you're one person who speaks up, on the side of people whose lives have been upended by all this, they need that, because no one is speaking for them. Really, no one. And you're not even allowed to speak for yourself because you'll be called a grandma killer because you're complaining that everything you've built in your life is being ruined. So that one is called Lockdowns and Their Forgotten Victims, something like that. So anyway,
before you go on, I just wanted to interject on a point you just made. I don't know if you saw this. It was NBC News, I'm 99% sure, just had a piece about how mental illness and suicide has increased enormously among elderly people because they're trapped in these nursing homes and no one's talking to them. Yeah. And it one of the things I only half joke about Ayn Rand is that her villains are much kinder in her novels than they are in real life. And the shamelessness of a piece like this, when this is something we were all discussing for months, it just really, on a visceral level, enraged me. I don't know if you saw this, but I just want to hear your thoughts on that. Just sorry, as a sidebar.
Well, as a matter of fact, there was a nursing home in Colorado that made national news because the residents held a protest. And one of the signs said, "Rather die from COVID than loneliness." Oh my God. And, another one saying, "Give us freedom." And when they were asked, why are they doing this? They said, well, we look forward to things like a hug from a relative. This is what gives our lives meaning at this point. And this is an opinion I've heard from a lot of people at that age, that, look, if I've only got a year or two to go, I'll be damned if I'm going to spend it in some isolation chamber. This is what is the point of preserving my biological existence if I can't fulfill any of the purposes of my life?
This is our punishment for the worst of the worst killers. Rapists get cellmates. Child molesters get to be in Gen Pop. They get to fraternize. But someone whose only issue is that they've managed to live a long life and they can't afford maybe their own home or can't care for themselves. They're going to be locked into a room where they can't talk to their grandkids. It's so disturbing to me how blithely this is passed over by the corporate press when the whole premise is we're doing this to save these people's lives. Well, maybe ask them what they think.
Yeah. Ask them what they think, indeed. In fact, that's exactly what the governor of Florida said when he had his press conference opening up the state again. He said that, of course, we want to take special precautions when we're dealing with people who are particularly vulnerable, which would include the elderly. He said, but at the same time, we have to be careful not to assume we know what they want. Is because I know of a lot of older people who, when their relatives come to visit them with masks on, ask them to take the mask off because they want to see their faces. They want to see their smiles. And I mean, who are we to say, no, you can't make that value judgment because we've determined that this number of days of your life is worth one smile? I mean, this is kind of crazy. And then, although it's not dealing with elderly people specifically, there was a very interesting story that came out, and this was on all the news services from CNN to Fox, saying that in Japan, just last month, there were more suicides in a month than there have been COVID deaths all year.
Oh, I thought it was month to month, a month over a year.
The CNN headline reads, in Japan, more people died from suicide last month than from COVID in all of 2020.
My brain kind of autocorrected it to be because
how could that be? Right, your brain, I think, would have been right most of the time.
Okay, so maybe 1 month. Okay, so their COVID deaths were low. Japan has a historically high suicide rate. Okay, it's not that. Wow. Oh my goodness. Goodness.
So anyway, so that's what kind of part of what the talks were about, was trying to highlight these sorts of things that you can find if you look for them. And you can find them even being reported in mainstream outlets. I mean, the New York Times has actually run a number of articles, for example, about opening schools, about now, leaving aside how you and I feel about education. You know what the point is here, right?
No. I'm just laughing. Honestly, I'm laughing because when you said New York Times, my brain literally heard Trump say the New York Times, which is failing badly.
Yes, right. But like they ran an article saying that over the next 5 years, because of the various disruptions caused by the lockdowns, we've already baked in now that there will be more than usual. There will be 1.4 million more tuberculosis deaths than we would have had otherwise, and 500,000 HIV deaths and 385,000 malaria deaths over and above what there would have been otherwise. Now, they reported that, mainstream outlet. So what I was trying to do in these talks was take all these isolated items, but create out of them like a lightning round where it's just bang, bang, bang. We just talk about this one, all these different side effects of lockdown. So the video that got taken down, the one called The COVID Cult, of course, you can find it on BitChute, and it's on my blog at tomwoods.com. But yeah, that got taken down even after, I think the sort of thing that happens is it gets their attention when it hits a certain number.
Yeah.
Because that thing was being viewed between Facebook and YouTube, and it was on several people's channels. It was at about 1.5 million views total.
Was that your biggest video that you've ever done?
Yes, it was. And
that's amazing. Okay.
Yeah, and then it violated YouTube's terms of service. So I think we can understand this in tandem with what Facebook did to the video, which was they fact-checked it. I've never been fact-checked before by Facebook, never. And I have to admit that part of me thought that if you were, I realize this is naive, if you were super careful and precise, it probably wouldn't happen to you. That was just sloppy people. Well, I was as careful and precise as a human being could possibly be.
Right, that's for the loons. That's for the loons, people who are saying if I eat carrots or I inject myself with chlorine, like the president said verbatim, then that's fine. And we can understand why that would be a good thing to kind of be like, all right, there's a lot of misinformation, it got deleterious consequences. That is not what you were doing.
Right, exactly. And so what they did with the fact, I ended up doing a whole episode of my podcast refuting the refutation. Because I actually, when I gave the talk, I wondered to myself, how would somebody refute the points that I'm making? Well, I got to see the answer. And the answer is very badly. Because, for instance, one of the things I did, it was a very failed refutation, very failed fact check. Because I went through 9 different things that the lockdowns have done that have been damaging. And their fact check of this was twofold. Number one, they said that, I was saying there's a study out there by something called the Wellbeing Trust that estimates that there will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 75,000 deaths of despair, which is suicides and drug and alcohol overdoses. And their response was, well, we don't have any hard numbers on this yet, but yeah, it's a projection. Now, they rely on projections 24 hours a day. The whole narrative is about projections.
I just love this idea. Well, none of these people have died yet, so your claim is false. And it's
right.
That's accurate. They're still alive. Yeah. That's a good thing that they're still alive.
So that was one. The other one was, wow. I claimed correctly that we almost never hear anything about downsides to the lockdown strategy. I mean, I don't think now. On this I could be wrong, but I personally, who follow this sort of closely, I don't remember hearing Fauci even acknowledge that there were trade-offs until October. That's the earliest I saw. So they fact-checked this and said, oh, no, the World Health Organization has pointed out the problems that can happen with lockdown. And they linked me to an article from the World Health Organization in October. So 7 months after we've been through this, they finally say, there's a problem when you lock everybody in their houses. So it's partly false for me to say, but what? So it was stuff like that. And then they're trying to claim, despite all the evidence around us, that there isn't actually a debate going on about the effectiveness of these measures, like masks and lockdowns. There's no actual debate. The science has already settled that masks and lockdowns work. So if you're arguing with that, then we need to fact check you. But there are people arguing this constantly. There are peer-reviewed papers. There's a paper in The Lancet that says that there doesn't seem to be any connection between lockdown measures and health outcomes.
And let's break this down, because I don't understand the science and you followed it. If the masks work, what do you need lockdowns for?
Yeah, so the best thing they can come up with that is they work, but they're not foolproof.
But
so
then what does work mean?
They help to slow the spread.
The point is, it's like getting pregnant. Yeah, it's true that condoms break and they're not 100% efficacious, but if you're using a condom and the condom's applied correctly and it's not rocket science, she's not going to get pregnant. So if the masks are at all comparable in terms of a preventative as a condom, then you don't need the lockdowns. If they're not at all, if they're 50%, then it's really, the HIV parallel is there. It is incumbent on you, if someone who, as a member of a vulnerable population, someone who's being promiscuous or whatever, you have to take those precautions, assume whoever you're interacting with has the disease, and act accordingly. And if the masks aren't that, even if it's 90%, if this is life or death, it is incumbent on you to be all right, I have to make sure, at that point, then just make sure my mask, as a vulnerable person, wear 2 masks, whatever I need to do. But I'm the one who's going to have to take responsibility, because I have to assume with any illness, whoever I'm interacting with is not engaged in good faith or is just ignorant.
Yeah. That is probably the correct way people should be thinking. Now, on the mask thing, I haven't really made much of a fuss about masks, because early on, my thought was, because I didn't know anything, I thought maybe masks would work, because it seems plausible. You put a mask on, maybe that keeps all your stuff to yourself. I don't know, it seemed plausible. So I remember thinking, if that's my ticket to getting out of my house again, I don't care. I'll do it. I'm whatever you want me to do, I'll wear that mask. But the thing is that now that we've had months and months and months of this, after we were told by the director of the CDC that if Americans would just wear masks for 4 to 6 weeks, we'd really get this thing under control. Well, okay, America is at, apparently the latest survey finds 88% compliance. That's been true of a lot of countries around the world that are seeing massive spikes. What does this mean? I think it means that they've been oversold. And there's a guy on the Biden COVID team named Michael Osterholm, who he's, like all those people, been wrong on he way overestimated everything about the virus, but he is an expert on influenza.
Wait. I just want to interject, because we all remember when this started, best case scenario is 3 million deaths. Yeah. That's if we do everything exactly right. That's the best we can hope for. It's guaranteed our hospitals are going to be overflowing, that there's not going to be ventilators, and people are going to be on the streets. The articles are still there. Look them up. Best case scenario, millions dead in America.
Yeah. And in fact, I want to get back to that in a second. So Osterholm, who, as I say, he's on the Biden team, he says, look, I have spent 40 years of my life on influenza. And he says, he says, this whole thing about masks, I have never seen such a massive public health recommendation with such flimsy support behind it. Now, he has run as far away from this comment as he possibly can. He's been saying, oh, no, you have to wear masks. Go ahead and wear a mask. But what he said at the time, before he knew he'd be on the Biden COVID team, was that wearing one of the kinds of masks that almost everybody is wearing is the equivalent of closing 3 out of the 5 doors on your submarine and thinking you're going to keep the water out. You know, everything's just come through the sides, right? Like that's it. He says, so it is, he says, it's much, he says, of these different measures we've recommended, social distancing is way more important than mask wearing. But mask wearing, it's like you get shamed and assaulted. Now, the thing I wanted to come back to was you saying that the headlines from the beginning were all saying, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. In the most recent talk I gave, I looked back at the example of Japan, because today, Japan is held up as a victory for masks. But the thing is, old Woods here is old enough to remember what they were saying about Japan 7-8 months ago. Back in April, the headlines, and I quoted a bunch of the headlines. I found them because they're right there on the internet.
Right.
The headlines were not saying, Japan's not locking down hard, but don't worry, they're wearing masks. Nobody was assuring us Japan's going to be fine. Everybody's wearing masks. They were not saying that. They were saying Japan is going to get pummeled because they're not listening to the public health guidelines. They're not locking down. They're not doing mass testing. They did barely any testing compared to a place like South Korea. They didn't go in for the massive testing of asymptomatics. They didn't do any of this stuff. They issued some guidelines. They did some modest lockdown, but not really. And we were and the headlines were, Washington Post had a headline like too little too late for Japan, whatever. Okay, Japan turns out to have one of the lowest death rates. They did amazingly well despite having a very high elderly population. Those people who panicked and screamed and warned that everybody was going to die.
Wait, hold on. Let's talk about this, because historically, and it's very, very well known, Japan's whole demographic crisis was that everyone in Japan is old. And
Yes.
not only is everyone old, they're living far longer. I think Japan by far has the longest longevity of any country on earth. So
Yes.
not only do they have a huge percentage of elderly people as a proportion of their population, their elderly are also older than our elderly.
Yeah, their elderly make our elderly look like you.
Yeah. So, well, I don't know about that, but this is great. But the point being, this is on paper the time bomb.
Yes, right.
And at extreme geographical proximity and population density. Like if all these scenarios were as they claimed, Japan would be ground zero for the ultimate COVID like extinction event.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, there's a lot there. So my point was simply, I'm really not interested in the opinion of people who were screaming that everything was going to be horrible. And then they say, oh, you know what? We figured it out. It was math. Come on. Right. So that I don't buy that. But secondly, a lot of these Asian countries seem to have had similar results with wildly differing policies. I mean, you know, there were hard lockdowns in some places and contact tracing and all that. And then you had the haphazard response of Japan, which everybody has to admit was haphazard because they were all screaming about it themselves back in April. They're on the record saying they did everything wrong. They fumbled it. They said Abe fumbled the coronavirus response. And yet, oddly enough, they had this result. So it makes you wonder, as some people have wondered, if maybe, because as you say, if all these warnings about the deadliness of the virus were even partly true, Japan should be a Japan-shaped graveyard.
Yeah.
It shouldn't just have a mild, it should be, and to try to look for government response as being the explanation for why it has been so successful seems like a stretch to me. So I think now, again, I have no background in this, but it doesn't matter because nobody really knows the answer to this yet.
And I'm going to add another. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I did not mean to.
It's plausible that there is pre-existing immunity to this virus, but that pre-existing immunity is not homogeneously distributed around the world. It seems like it's concentrated in certain places because you have such radically different government responses and yet such a mild result each time. It seems like there's no other possible explanation, but we still don't quite know.
And I was just sorry to interrupt you. What I was going to add to that is, this is my beat is obviously North Korea. And on paper, if Japan is one model for what should be a demographic nightmare in terms of COVID and the models, North Korea is another one. Sure, they're a totalitarian state, but you also have extreme physical proximity as a rule. Like North Korea doesn't like people to be by themselves because then they're scheming against the government. They're getting individualist. Their medical supply is horrific. When I went to the maternity hospital myself, when they were showing it off, this is for tourists, many of the tools were rusty. I mean, it's really barbaric, a lot of the mechanisms they have. So if you're going to have a situation, they even had polio in the 90s when the famine came back. I mean, this is how backwards they're in many, although on paper it's a second world country, they operate like a third world country. You would think, okay, it's just going to wipe them all out. And that hasn't happened. And people ask me, and I have not even the slightest bit of theory as to why that is.
Well, you know what's similar is what's going on in my own home state not home state, but my current state of Florida, because Florida was pretty open up till the end of September, and then it was completely open, by which we mean no capacity restrictions except what are voluntarily assumed. The localities can impose mask mandates, but they can't collect fines. Well, the fine really is the thing. Right?
Yeah.
So now it's true that cases have gone up a bit, not catastrophically, but a bit in Florida, but they've been going up way faster in places that have been heavily locked down. But it seems to me that if the cartoon version of the virus were correct, Florida should be, like, if Florida were just 10% worse than the rest of the country, even that would be miraculous. That shouldn't be, with no restrictions. I mean, I observe people just going about life here every single day. There should be mountains of dead bodies everywhere, it seems to me. It shouldn't just be that, like, again, even if I don't think Florida is worse, but let's say if Florida were mildly worse than some other place. Well, okay, but even that shows that apparently something's fishy about this virus if it spreads exponentially. Remember that we got all the midwits telling us about exponential growth, and that doesn't seem to happen. So when I asked Martin Kulldorff of Harvard, who was on my show, he's an epidemiologist, how do you account for the fact that the Sunbelt spike came down in Florida without any lockdowns? Like, what is the explanation for that? Why didn't it just continue on exponentially?
Yeah.
And he said, we still don't fully know, but the word immunity has to come into that sentence somewhere, that population has somehow built up some kind of immunity. And that is the missing piece of this puzzle.
What else I found very disturbing is that when the Florida stuff happened, there was a day or two when the numbers started increasing. And they were like, we were right, told you so. The governor is going to be looking like an idiot. You're going to have lots of grandmas in Florida, that's for sure. It's going to be bodies to the sky. And when that didn't happen, they just pretended they weren't giddy to have been proven right. And by being proven right, that meant mass deaths.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Basically what happened was we saw the indicators coming down. Then around the time of the full reopening, which again is not that big of a difference, there was a bit of a plateau that happened, but it should have shot back up, right? I mean, it should be clear and obvious, and that didn't. And yeah, there was a sense when Georgia reopened. Remember the headlines that it was an experiment in human sacrifice, and it's trying to be the number one death destination in America, and they did fine. Georgia did fine by any measure. And bear in mind, again, Florida has, just like Japan, a fairly old population. It has the 5th oldest population in the country, has a lot of tourists who come in and out. It has a lot of factors you would think would contribute to major problems here. When you factor all that in, I think it's been doing as well as can be expected, especially when I look at what's been happening in Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, California, whatever. Despite all the lockdowns and whatever, they are still seeing numbers going up again.
Let's talk a bit about New York. Governor Cuomo released a book, just shamelessly, right ahead of the election, lessons learned from the COVID thing, and took his victory lap. Can you play devil's advocate and explain to me how Cuomo is being given an Emmy and is being touted as an example of success where my understanding is New York had the most casualties per capita of anywhere. Like, I don't know how to reconcile these two things other than some kind of Orwellian nightmare.
Well, first of all, I agree with you about the publication of the book. I would think even if I were a Cuomo sympathizer, like if Ron DeSantis, whom I like very much in Florida, if he wrote a book about this right now, I would think that was just skeezy, bad taste, just completely inappropriate to do that. At least wait till the thing is over before you publish your book about how great you are. I can't get over that. It looks like that book tanked, by the way. So,
good. I have a signed copy.
A couple times I checked the Amazon sales rank, and you and I know how that works, and he was nowhere. He was nowhere. So that's at least a good thing. But yeah, I've been wondering the same thing. So I guess the best you can come up with is Cuomo had to deal with the virus at a time when there was much less knowledge about it. And so, for example, it wasn't clear yet that ventilators might actually not be helpful, might be counterproductive. And he was screaming we needed 40,000 ventilators. Well, they ended up getting a handful of ventilators. They didn't even use all of those. They gave those ventilators away to other states. But so there weren't effective treatments, that doctors weren't even fully understanding what they were witnessing. And so during that time, Cuomo made hard decisions that brought the curve down, I guess would be the way you would put it.
But am I incorrect that New York had the most deaths per capita?
It's either New York or New Jersey. I forget which one.
Okay, so it's silver.
But it's one of the top two.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, you can always play that argument. Well, it would have been much worse.
Yeah,
and yeah, sure, you can play that game all day, but on paper, there's still a lot of bodies to be put away.
Yeah, and not to mention the thing is, things would have. Imagine how much worse things would have been if we hadn't done this or that. One of the problems with that kind of argument is that you can generate. There are different places online where you can generate your own graphs of hospitalizations and deaths and cases in various countries. And then you can plot them against each other, one superimposed on the other, and try and figure out which is which. Well, Peru did a super inhumane, savage lockdown, and Brazil didn't. And they're not, they're different places. I get that. They're culturally different. They have different languages, but they're on the same continent. They're not a million miles removed. And they kind of look the same. So what's going on there? Or the problem is every time you compare nobody minds comparing some of the Asian countries to the U.S. because the Asian countries did better, and they are sure that's because of wise government intervention. But if you try to compare Sweden to the U.S., it's always, they're culturally different. We can't compare them. So it's, they're not really being completely honest when they decide what we're allowed to compare. But the answer is always that, they're too different to compare. So we can't compare. We can't even compare states. Because, for example, I was comparing North Carolina and Oklahoma, and I was tracking the deaths. I have this chart where one is superimposed on the other. North Carolina has been much more heavily locked down than Oklahoma. And yet it's uncanny. The deaths track each other almost exactly. So I'm told, North Carolina is too different. Okay. So how about if we compare within a state? Would that be all right? Or so then somebody sent me, and I keep using it because it's such a great example, sent me a graph of just within one state, just within Tennessee, 4 counties, and one of them, and they all have exactly the same curve. And my joke is, I want you to guess which one of these counties closed their bars and limited restaurants to 25% capacity. On the basis of this chart, you tell me. And of course, the answer is you have no idea which one it is,
right? Because
they have exactly the same results. I mean, why is there no curiosity about this? It's all just panic. When things don't pan out and there aren't as many deaths as they expect, and Trump's appearance in Florida is not a super spreader, as you say, they just move on to the next thing. Why are they so, they have no curiosity? I'm very curious. Why should this be? As somebody who in March was very concerned about this, I was alarmed about this.
Yeah,
I would have expected there would be a clear and obvious difference in that chart, or that a state that didn't really lock down would be dramatically worse than another state. And that is not the case. And there's no one even cares about that. Why? I have some hypotheses, but are you surprised by how
docile Americans have been about this. And I, over the last couple of days, have gone full Alex Jones. To the point of specifically what I mean is, I think at this point, it seems like they want to push this as long as possible. So a lot of people forget what it's like to be able to leave your home whenever you want and go about your business, and to travel without having to have any kind of explanation to other countries.
Wow. Well, when I was speculating about whether it would be more difficult with a Biden presidency or more difficult with a Trump presidency to resume normality. And I came up with a scenario in which under Biden, it becomes easier to resume normality. And I realize that runs contrary to what people think. And I'm not saying that the day if Biden is sworn in,
sure,
suddenly he abandons all the restrictions. I mean, I'm not saying anything silly like that. But the thing is, all these public health officials who've been screaming that there's no plan, are they really going to keep saying that under Biden? Are they really going to keep looking at the numbers and spinning them as negatively as possible? Are they really going to keep running the PCR cycles at 35 and above? I mean, are they really going to keep doing all this? There are ways that they can take credit for turning it around with some token measures and then declaring victory. And then Biden can say, look at what happened under this stupid guy. When you select somebody not in the establishment, look what happens. But I came along with the scientists and I gave you your life back, your weddings, your graduations, all these sorts of things. I don't think that's an implausible scenario.
The 2 points. One, the counter. I'm just going to sidebar here because you just did something very, very funny. So this is going to be a little history lesson, which I'm sure you're familiar with. 100 years ago, this year, Warren Harding was campaigning for the White House. Woodrow Wilson had been president for 8 years, the only Democrat elected since Grover Cleveland. The first election in 1912 was a fluke because the Republican Party had been split. He barely won re-election. It was a few thousand votes in California, separated from Charles Evans Hughes. And Warren Harding campaigned on, after the Great War, a return to normalcy. And all the corporate press called him a complete moron because that's not a word. The word is normality. And what an idiot. So attacking the Republicans as being complete morons and buffoons is not a 2020 phenomenon. This has been going on for 100 years. And in their defense, by all accounts, Warren Harding was not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer. In fact, when the Republicans picked him to be the nominee, they just said, I forget who it was, but they said, I wish Warren would just go home and shut the F up and just let us get him elected. And they basically want him not to campaign. Did you know about that?
Well, I think Harding was somewhat smarter than they give him credit for,
Sure.
and I think probably compared to today's. But yeah, it's rather similar to the Biden campaign.
Yes.
Yeah.
I forgot where I was going.
Well, I was saying that there's a plausible way out for Biden if he wants.
This is my issue. Why I think here's another scenario which I don't think you're going to necessarily disagree with. I think Governor Newsom of California, I think Governor Cuomo of New York, I think Governor Whitmer of Michigan, they're very, very happy being, and this is the Hamiltonian versus Jeffersonian argument, right? The argument is, I'm only being half tongue-in-cheek here. Well, let's have 13 states. That's going to increase freedom. And my argument was, you're just going to have 13 Pol Pots. And I think we're seeing that it's very plausible that if you do have a Biden administration being like, okay, let's return to normality or normalcy, depending on whether you're a Democrat or Republican, having Cuomo and all these other people being like, no, we're not giving up this power that we have, because on some level they enjoy it. It makes them feel like a big shot. It makes them feel like they're making the tough choices. And we've also seen a little bit of this in New York, within New York State, like you were just talking about earlier about Tennessee, where Governor de Blasio wanted to have hardcore quarantine, and Governor Cuomo had to be like, no, we're not doing this. You're a lunatic. So I think we're going to see some pushback at the very least between the Biden people and the Cuomos of the world.
Well, okay. So now here's my counter to that. I get, of course, that they enjoy exercising this power, but I think the federal government enjoyed exercising the powers they had during World War II. But that doesn't mean they don't want victory in World War II.
Sure.
To be able to say, look at what we accomplished. And then secondly, I think I forgot to answer your other question about, am I surprised at the docility of the American public? Extremely, because I was thinking back in April that if this goes on another month, I mean, people,
someone's going to snap. Someone's going to snap.
Right. Of course, we're not all a bunch of losers. We have actual lives we want to resume.
Well, we are, but the people out there aren't.
Yeah, right. But not to mention also your kids' lives.
Yeah.
Like, even if you don't value your own life, your kids are being deprived of things that they shouldn't be deprived of, and that their grandparents shouldn't be trying to deprive them of, and decent grandparents aren't trying to deprive them. Decent grandparents are saying, look, obviously the rule can't be I got to enjoy my life as a youngster, but you can't,
right?
Because I'm in danger. No, look, I'll figure out a way to keep myself safe, but for crying out loud, it's not like, well, you're 16, but when this is all over, when you're 18, we'll rewind time and you can get those years back. You can't.
Right.
So I have been shocked at this, but it's in part due to how suggestible people are. That if Hollywood were half divided, I think America would be feeling more free to speak out. But it's everywhere you turn, every corporate CEO, every actor, just about, they're all in favor of this. And most people, it's the same technique as to call everybody a hater. Nobody wants to be called a hater. And the vast majority of people aren't haters. So they go out of their way to try to show that they're not haters. Well, likewise, nobody wants to be accused of wanting to kill grandparents. And so they go out of their way to show their conformity with this. But what is just amazing to me is you could make documentary after documentary of all the lives ruined and the dreams crushed, and yet you almost never hear any stories of this because they're all terrified to tell them.
Hey guys, Michael Malice here. Want to tell you about one of my favorite sponsors, Sheath Underwear. If you go to Sheath, SHEATH underwear.com and use promo code Malice20, you get 20% off. What is Sheath Underwear? They are the most comfortable boxer briefs you're ever going to wear. When they brought them to the studio, I'm like, what is this? I was very skeptical, and now I wear them every day. What makes Sheath so unique is, it's got a stretchy fabric made out of moisture-wicking technology, super soft. That's great. They also have this dual pouch system for us guys, which keeps different parts of your body separated in your pants. I like it because it's a little bit subversive. And my people like subversion. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice20, you get 20% off. They've got lots of cool different designs. I wear the camo ones to keep my genitals looking even more invisible. Let's get back to the show. I am going to put on my Antifa hat, not only half ironically, and say corporate America has spent a good part of this year cheering on and rooting for the systemic physical and economic destruction of small business in this country. They did it with the looting and the rioting back in whenever that was. They did it with this lockdown. Talk about disparate impact. If I am a big corporation, I am Amazon, Target, Walmart, I am cleaning up. There have been so many stores. I've mentioned this before, Century 21, which is a store I used to spend as a kid, bored out of my mind with my mom, which I go to as an adult. It's been there my entire life. They're out of business, Ice and Vice. This is the quintessential, American story. I'm some immigrant. I come over here, I open a laundry, restaurant, or I'm a young creator. I'm making a little shop, a little boutique, something like that. I'm the first one to go. And, Amazon's not going to have a problem. Oh, your storefront's out of business. That's okay. Sell on our marketplace. Sell on Etsy or these other places. So I find it extremely malevolent how corporate America has been looking at this and just downright sociopathic.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's shocking, and it does serve to remind us. And from time to time, I can stand to be reminded of this, that although there are true Randian heroes in the world, in the business world, who accomplish great things and invent great things and improve our lives, when the prospect of wielding this kind of power, because this is a grant of power that's being given to them, that they can, that their competition is going to be crippled by the state. That is a grant of power. It can turn them into, or bring out the latent sociopath within. It's amazing to me that there's no reason this has to be a left-wing, right-wing thing. It does not have to be that way. And early in the year, by the way, you can still find on Twitter, I found a thread of liberals saying, typical conservatives overreacting to this whole thing. It's just the flu, So and not to mention that this document called the Great Barrington Declaration that was drafted by three experts in the field, Oxford, Stanford, and Harvard professors, and then signed by many other healthcare people in the general public, speaking against lockdowns and in favor of just protecting the vulnerable. That kind of document, first of all, I don't know why that took like almost the whole year for that to happen. Just repeating what should be obvious to us, that the consequences of the lockdowns are horrific. The toll that they're taking is extremely bad. But the point is that 2 out of those 3 doctors are actually on the left. Sunitra Gupta of Oxford said in an article she wrote in the Daily News there that she said, my politics are all on the left. I like nationalization of major industries. I like this, that, and the other thing. I'm not a right winger. And then likewise, Martin Kulldorff of Harvard, I think he's a Swede. And I don't think he's right wing, but he's gone out of his way. He was interviewed by Jacobin magazine. His concern is that the working class is getting crushed by this.
Yes.
And he's on the left, but his view is, why am I so lonely out here? Unless something other than the protection of the working class has become the fixation of the left, I don't get what's happening here. Because the working class, he says, is being asked to bear the entire burden of this, while the affluent sit, sipping their fancy coffees in their home offices.
I consider myself a hardcore patriot. I hate that word is used ironically and sarcastically and all these other things and has connotations. I'm very glad I'm an American. I have a lot of opportunities here. I think this country is the bee's knees. I think the day I was most ashamed of America was seeing last week, it was a Canadian restaurant in Toronto where they were fighting the cops and they were saying, you know what, we're staying open. And I'm like, my God, if the Canadians have more backbone than us, what has happened to us as a country? It was very sad.
I agree. The major protests, the mass protests have all been in Europe. We've had handfuls of people here and there. Now that Stop the Steal protest, that was not about lockdowns. I mean, very, very, very implicitly it may have been, but that wasn't the purpose of gathering. So we've had a handful of small protests, but when you see entire town, city squares filled with people, those are always European scenes. And then they're portrayed, what else? These are only neo-Nazis think you should leave your house. Okay.
Yeah, if there's one thing Nazis like, is people leaving the attic. Oh my God. I am the other thing that I would like to hear you explain their point of view is that we were told for a long time, if we do this, it's going to flatten the curve. Take the medicine now, you're not going to have the pain later. And now, second wave. Everyone said in March, it's going to winter or summer, whatever, in the Southern Hemisphere, and then it's coming back in the fall. Was this unavoidable? Did they not prepare for it? Like, I don't understand what's going on here.
Well, especially when, I wouldn't say I supported it, but I could at least understand the rationale of, we're dealing with an unknown virus that is potentially extremely lethal, and we need to take a quick pause to make sure we're prepared to cope with it.
Yeah.
I can get that. Like, if you ask me to try not to do the following things just for the sake of this, I would have done that. But I guess what I kind of like to know is, it's now been, since we did that, it's been 8.5 months. What was done in the past 8.5 months to expand capacity or to whatever? I mean, what has been done? Now, I did ask this of some people in certain hospital systems, and some of them said, well, here's what we did. We adapted this part of the hospital. We did this and that and the other thing. But I guess we kind of want to know, look, a lot of people burned through their savings to support them during this time, to support the healthcare sector. And then to be told, well, sorry, we got to lock down again because we're overwhelmed again. I guess we need a lot more hospitals after this is over. I don't know just let them just mothball them for a while. I don't know.
I'm not
Dr.
wrong.
Fauci,
Okay.
Dr. Fauci, you can get him on record. I mean, Trump is correct about Fauci. You can get him on record saying either thing. So he even said at one point, there's no guarantee there's going to be a second wave. So there was reason to think, oh, maybe there won't be. And then there were other times when he would say the second wave is going to be the tough one. Or there is pre-existing immunity possibly, or no, there is. I mean, I don't know. And then there was I wish I could remember his name, but I shared an excerpt of a Democratic congressman confronting Fauci at one of these hearings and asking him a question and saying, look, what is the length of time that a vaccine typically takes and to development? And Fauci said 7 years. And the guy said, all right, well, look, in other words, anybody who's putting his life on hold waiting for a vaccine is being a fool. Well, we have to figure out a way to return to normal. This is a Democrat. And Fauci said, I couldn't agree with you more. Now, but does that sound like, I mean, when you listen to Fauci all day, does he sound like somebody who couldn't agree more with that statement? Is that how he's portraying himself? It's like whoever he speaks to last, that's how you're going to know what he's going to say. So I don't know how to make sense of any of it. He was even saying maybe we wouldn't have one.
Are you surprised by, or are you? I know the answer, but I want to hear your thoughts. I imagine you're as disturbed as I am by how international the response has been. Like, I just wanted to get on a plane and listen to like music till 5 a.m. somewhere. I just tweeted that out last week. And there's like nowhere I can go on my passport.
Yeah. It's unbelievable how they all basically went for the same kind of thing. And then, as I've been pointing out, what a catastrophically ridiculous strategy that would be for the developing world, especially where a lot of these African countries have a very low average age. They don't have as large of a vulnerable population. So I gave the example because I know a guy, I know Gret Glyer, who created a philanthropy app, who actually lived 3 years of his life in Malawi, which at the time may still be the poorest country in the whole world. And those bastards were planning to shut Malawi down. Now, these people live hand to mouth. Every day they earn enough to eat enough food to last till the next day. So they can't sit in their houses for 6 weeks. Are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. So in Malawi, what happened was not reported in the West, but what happened was the people rose up and said, we're not going to be locked down, so you can just forget about that. And they did forget about it. And Malawi was not locked down. And I don't know how many COVID deaths Malawi has had, but I would take a wild guess at somewhere around 0. So for 0, they were going to starve these people to death, basically. I mean, there's no other way of putting it.
Oh my God, this is just. So you've been following this story obviously very closely. In the last couple of weeks, or since the election, have the trends been getting, in terms of the articles and what people are saying, have they been pointing in a worse direction, a better direction? Like, where are we heading?
I think for the U.S., it's been trending a bit more negative, and they can still do that with Trump still in. But in Europe, and this is in the talk I just gave to the state legislators, the one on the forgotten victims of lockdown, I actually go through the numbers with regard to what's going on in different European countries, where it seems like they hit their peak and started coming down, but it seems like they started coming down if you factor in the time it takes between when you get the virus and when you show symptoms and all that. If you factor that in, it's quite clear that they were coming down before the lockdowns. And this is like almost time and again this happens. And then, of course, they're going to try to credit the lockdowns with that. So there may be some favorable stories coming out of Europe that, gee, maybe we have turned a corner. And in the UK, they're going to let you have a Christmas bubble where you and members of 2 other households can be together. But all this started to turn before the interventions occurred. And that's the key thing that has to get out there. Because even once this thing is behind us, and all pandemics pass eventually, it's going to matter that we get the narrative on this right. So, for example, just because the Great Depression is over now doesn't mean that it doesn't matter for us to, not know what caused it or get it wrong. Because I don't want to have every 5 years, I'm not going to be locked in my house. To hell with that. We got to fight this thing and show how the interventions that they did don't seem to show results. And when a red state governor slightly allows people to live a little, they just go berserk on him if there's even the tiniest rise in so-called cases. But then you have all these states that have been locked down like crazy, and they're seeing massive spikes, even though they're all wearing masks and all that. Yeah. The media never says, "Oh, shame on them." It's never. It's because they know what causes it. People's bad behavior. I pointed out that the governor of Nevada got the virus 3 days after he had lectured the people of his state for their bad behavior. And I'm going to give you 2 weeks, and after the 2 weeks, I'm not going to come back and say you have another chance. And then 3 days later, he got it and said, "I don't know how I got it. I have followed every precaution in the book." Yeah, how about that? Arnie Duncan, who was Secretary of Education, he got it. He and his wife got it. And they said, we did everything. We social distanced. We wore masks. We didn't have people at our house. We don't know how we got it. So the narrative whereby there's a moral problem when you get the virus is as anti-scientific as it is possible to be. People are innocently trying to survive, and some of them get the virus.
I'm going to tweet that out right now. If you listen to the corporate press, the thing that is most correlated with getting coronavirus, ready for this, is disobedience. Right? Isn't that fair to say?
Yes.
I mean, that's what the stories look. If I just looked at the headlines and I see who's bad and who deserves it and who's good, and this is the one we knew why he didn't do it. He didn't follow the rules, and this one we can hand wave it away.
Yeah, yeah.
There's one story which I was extremely disturbed by, and it takes a lot for me to get disturbed. And that's Governor, I believe his name is Scott of Vermont. And he basically announced that he's going to have teachers having their kids snitch on their parents to say what they were doing over Thanksgiving, and take appropriate action. And I just replied to him, "You should be in Gitmo," and I meant it. I said that to Gavin Newsom. It's gotten, I think, the same amount of likes as his tweet. This is such a softball question, but I still want to hear your answer. As a parent, as a libertarian, how does it feel for you to see a politician publicly say we're going to ask children to snitch on their folks, to their teachers?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It reminds me how fortunate I consider myself to be to live in this state. I was actually considering relocating to the Northeast, and I'm glad I didn't do that to my kids. So thankfully mine don't live in an atmosphere where they're put in that position. But it's unbelievable they want to invade the house, the sanctity of the household in this way, and pit people against each other. I mean, we all know who is best known for doing that. Yeah. But even Stalin, in his heart of hearts, knew that only a disgusting pig would do that to his parents. And in fact, there was an incident where some kid got some honor for having snitched on his parents. And aside, Stalin said, "Yeah, what a little pig." Because even he gets that you shouldn't really do it. I mean, we ask you to, but you're a disgusting degenerate if you actually do it. But yeah, I'm just so grateful because, again, we have a lot of masks around here. There are still counties that have mask mandates. And I feel like that's not the worst of the offenses, but at the same time, what's the metric where we get to stop doing this? Because I want to see other people. I don't want babies to grow up in a world that looks like the Twilight Zone and they never get to see anyone smile at them. I mean, we all know the studies of the baby looks at the mom who won't smile and then just cries. And then the baby sees a smile and perks right up. If you look around at people with masks, it's like none of them are smiling at you. Everybody in the world is hostile. Do we think there might be some possible, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a child psychologist. Maybe it's perfectly normal for a kid to grow up in a world with no facial expressions.
Yeah, that's how you recruit them into libertarianism.
Yeah. But honestly, how nonverbal communication is important. Like, I can't believe I even have to argue.
Tom, we're going to win. We're going to get Joe Jorgensen elected. Okay, Tom, we're running.
My point was, other than the masks, we just do, like, this weekend I'm taking my kids to a play. I'm going to take them to see Matilda in Winter Garden. Like, there's actually, in the midst of this, and by the way, this will be the second play I've seen in the past 2 or 3 months. And I know you're not a theater guy, but what matters here is that somehow, with all this going on, people were rehearsing a play somewhere. I don't know how that was happening.
It would be really, really funny if it's really bad because they could only rehearse like by themselves. Yeah, so like, it's just like a complete debacle. Like they're all stepping at each other's lines. They don't know how to frame it.
Yeah, or there's one actor and everybody else is on a Zoom screen.
Yes.
I'll let you know.
Yeah. Tom, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this episode?
Let's see. Well, it was nice. Actually, I have not actually talked to anybody about, I've not had the meta conversation of talking about the videos. And so I hope in the description here, people will especially watch the last couple that I did, the 2 shortest ones, because I think I really honed the message by then. But also it's information people just need to have. And maybe you have somebody in your family who is reachable. Some of them are not.
Yeah.
And I think these are the kinds of means that you can use. But yeah, to actually sit here and process this with somebody was actually quite helpful.
And incidentally, the 2 shortest ones is also the name of our forthcoming cartoon. You are welcome.